Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Sarah Entz, and I'm the Promotions and Publicity Coordinator at the University of Manitoba Press. To everyone here on Zoom and to everyone joining us on Facebook Live, welcome to the virtual launch of the Arts of Indigenous Health and Wellbeing. We have a really beautiful evening planned tonight with presentations from the 4 editors of this collection, as well as from 4 of the contributing authors. I'd like to acknowledge that the University of Manitoba Press is located on the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. U of M Press respects the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to moving forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. I'm going to share a 30% off code in the chat, which you can use if you buy this beautiful book directly from the U of M Press website. If you'd like to purchase the book but don't want to do it through our website, we urge you to support independent bookstores. McNally Robinson Bookstore, or booksellers located in Winnipeg and Saskatoon is a great example. They do a lot for their local writers and they do ship across Canada. So I'm just going to copy that into the chat. So all you have to do is click the link and it will take you to the website, and you can use that discount code to get 30% off. We have, as you can see, 8 speakers tonight with a lot of wisdom to share, and there will be many opportunities to engage with them and ask questions. The way this evening is going to go is that I will introduce the 4 editors shortly, and they will each take turns introducing different key themes from the book. They will also each introduce a contributing author whose essay in the book relates to that particular theme, and then the author will share a presentation. Following each presentation, we will be opening the floor to questions. So please do type your questions into the chat box at the bottom of your screen or the question and answer box at any time throughout the evening, and I will pose them to the authors or editors at the end of each presentation. Please also send me a message through the chat if you have any Zoom-related questions or difficulties at all. It is now my pleasure to welcome and introduce the 4 editors of the Arts of Indigenous Health and Wellbeing. Robert Henry is Métis from Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, and an assistant professor at the University of Saskatchewan Department of Indigenous Studies. His research areas include Indigenous street gangs and gang theories, Indigenous masculinities, Indigenous and critical research methodologies, youth mental health, and visual research methods. He is the co-editor of 2 recent publications, Global Indigenous Health, Reconciling the Past, Engaging the Present, Animating the Future, and Settler City Limits, Indigenous Resurgence and Colonial Violence in the Urban Prairie West. He has also published in the areas of Indigenous masculinity, Indigenous health, youth subcultures, and criminal justice. Nancy Van Styvendale is an associate professor in the Faculty of Native Studies at the University of Alberta, who researches and teaches in the fields of Indigenous carceral writing, arts-based programming in prisons, and community-engaged learning. She has co-edited 2 previous collections, Narratives of Citizenship and Global Indigenous Health, as well as a special issue of Engaged Scholar Journal on community service learning in Canada. Robert Alexander Innes is a member of Cowessess First Nation and an associate professor in the Indigenous Studies program and the Department of Political Science at McMaster University. He is the author of Elder Brother and the Law of the People, Contemporary Kinship and Cowessess First Nation, the co-editor along with Kim Anderson of Indigenous Men and Masculinities, Legacies, Identities, Regeneration, and the co-editor along with Bobby Henry, Amanda Lavallee, and Nancy Van Styvendale of Global Indigenous Health. J.D. McDougall is a Métis PhD candidate in the Department of English at the University of Saskatchewan, whose dissertation focuses on Métis family stories as culturally embedded practices of political kinship within local community history narratives. JD has provided illustrations and cover designs for publications such as Engaged Scholar Journal, Road to La Prairie Round by Court Donier, and this volume. They are currently an instructor of Indigenous literatures in English at First Nations University of Canada and an artist mentor for the Saskatchewan History and Folklore Society's Youth Storytelling Workshop program. I would like to now invite these authors to make some opening remarks. And I think we're going to start with Bobby.
Thanks, Sarah. So to begin, I just want to highlight that this collection really couldn't come together without the guidance and work that was done before. And in particular, the book is being dedicated to the late Dr. Joanna Piscanu, who I met back in 2010 when I started my PhD. And she was the head of the Institute of Indigenous Peoples Health Research here at the University, at the University of Regina, but here in Saskatchewan. Dr. Joanna Piscanu was a Métis scholar, professor of English at the First Nations University of Canada, and the director of the Indigenous Peoples Health Research Center at the University of Regina. Dr. Piscanu's award-winning book, Taking Back Our Spirits, published by the University of Manitoba Press in 2009, was only the second monograph of literary criticism on Indigenous writing published by an Indigenous critic in Canada. In it, she analyzed the beauty and purpose of Indigenous literary arts, and specifically the ways in which Indigenous story can influence hearts and minds, contribute to healing the wounds of colonialism, and create socio-political change at the level of public policy. By dedicating our collection to Dr. Piscanu, we honor the lasting contributions that she has made to our collective understanding of the intersections between Indigenous arts, health, and well-being. And so with that, I just want to say, again, thank you to Dr. Joanna Piscanu for everything she's done, not just for helping us think through arts and arts, wellness, and well-being, but also to support me to be here today, because without her support, I wouldn't be here as well. So thank you.
Sorry, looking for my mute button there. Thanks for that, Bobby. I wanted to just briefly say hello. I'm Nancy Van Styvendale. And I just wanted to note that a majority of this book's royalties will be going to SAWCI, SAWCI, which stands for the Saskatchewan Aboriginal Writers Circle, Inc. And SAWCI is a nonprofit organization that's committed to supporting Métis, First Nations, and Inuit writers of all genres through service, workshops, readings, and events. One of SAWCI's key initiatives, and folks may be aware of this already, is the Anskook Indigenous Literary Festival, which is an annual gathering that showcases the diversity of Indigenous authors and educates the general population about the richness of Indigenous literatures. And I will pop in the chat the website address for SAWCI in case people are interested in finding out more about that wonderful organization. And I do see at least one member of the board of SAWCI here with us today. So thank you for being here with us and for the wonderful work of your organization.
Alrighty, my turn to find the mute button on my screen. So I'm just going to really quickly share my screen here. I just wanted to introduce some of the themes of our collection, and also kind of do that by way sort of following the examples set by our contributors, following in kind of the spirit of this collection through sort of interpreting the art that actually is on the cover of the book, if that makes sense. So here we go. Let's see if I can get Zoom to do this for me. There we go. Hope you can all see that. I'm just sharing this pretty much in my photo viewer. This is if you haven't seen the cover of the book, this is it right here. So as Sarah mentioned, yeah, I put together the cover art for this, and one of the things that I sort of wanted to do, and I'm interested to hear folks' thoughts about this, right? This is a collaborative process as well, the kind of the interpretation here. So do feel free to kind of give me your thoughts as well. But some of the things I wanted to pull out, some of the major things that I wanted to pull out about this collection as a whole was the idea that health, well-being, and just our general sense of wellness and life, right? Life in the fullest sense, really is not separable from our community, right? It's not separable from the land, is not separable from any of the relational systems that govern our existence, right? And so that's reflected actually in a lot of the articles from this collection, all the chapters from this collection share the concept of miyopamatsuin or minobamatsuin, right? The good life, living well, living a full life, living a joyful life, being a human in the fullest sense, right? And I know right now that is an especially important concept, I think, for us to keep in mind, because so much, of the last couple of years has not looked very human, has not looked very full for many of us, right? The lives that we've been living. And so I think that part of the process of putting together this cover, I wanted that to be an affirmation of that. I wanted there to be a sense of energy, a sense of presence and motion and life inside of that, right? And a part of how that functions, right, in this collection is through interrelatedness, is through an acknowledgement of how all of these pieces are related, how our wellness is tied to our creative life and our artistic expressions and our culture, right? And so I sort of wanted to pick up on some of the common themes and some of the common points that we actually find across many of the articles in the collection too, and that some of those shared points, some of those shared references, I think those are really, really important, because that sense of interdisciplinarity, that sense of plurivocality that we're seeing in all of these different chapters and that unites them, I think that ultimately kind of gives us a path forward, right? In thinking about how do we come back to life, right, after all of this as well. And so some of the things I want to pull out from our 4 sections, some of the I guess ideas that I've found in common across the entire book, right? There's this idea of the relationships, right, and the knowledges and the life that are embedded in our material culture, in our embodied practices, and how we can move beyond thinking about art or creative practice as the objects that it creates or the performances that it produces, and instead to look at this as relationship, right, as relational engagements, as collaborations, as invitations to participate and to share, and that connects us to our ancestors and our descendants and the land around us, right? And all of those relational networks. And that's tied into the importance of community practice that we see in a lot of these articles as well, right? Community well-being, right? This is health beyond the individual. This is health of our communities, our nations, our peoples, and between communities, across communities as well. We want to think about this idea of healing, this idea of not just individual healing, but of course, collective healing as well. We want to move past ideas of, I guess, of reasserting or kind of reinscribing, for example, like victimhood, right? We want to move into these ideas of resilience and resurgence, and we see that, of course, in our 4th section, which Rob's going to talk about. And so we want to think about the arts and creative practices as being something that are future thinking, right? As being action oriented or as being transformative as well. And so I was kind of picking these up in all the different chapters that we were reading, and that was one of the challenges and one of the joys of organizing this collection, was trying to separate them into sections, right? Trying to group the articles into sections, because they overlapped so much with each other that it really seemed a little bit like a little bit of a challenge. And so that's where some of this I guess this visual language is coming in here in terms of the cover art, which now I will start talking about for real. But yeah, so the sense that I kind of wanted there to be a sense that there's sort of like a blending together, right? That there wasn't a solid boundary necessarily between any of these elements, and that there are multiple interpretive possibilities for each of them, right? That visually we could we could get very different connotations from them, and that or at least, you know, maybe complementary ones. And so I'd be interested to kind of, you know, to hear folks' thoughts, right? Because as I mentioned here, the interpretive practice of these things and the, you know, the act of kind of looking at a piece of art, right? That is itself a creative practice too, right? So we're sort of enacting that here, right here and now. But certainly, you know, the beadwork, for example, running along the top, right? We have the sense of interconnectedness, this idea that, you know, in beadwork practice, you want to show these different forms of like the life cycle of a plant, right? For example, and the life processes behind that. You want to show the interconnectedness of the parts. There's sort of a symmetry there, but it's more of a complementarity, right? And you know, we kind of see, we almost see those kind of tendrils mimicked maybe a little bit in, you know, the roots that are coming down. Well, see, here's the thing. I kind of figured these as being sort of root-like, but they also remind me a little bit of lightning, right? Which of course was an image that showed up in one of our chapters as well, the Dragon chapter, right? So so it you know, if we kind of make our way through, I guess through the different elements, right, that are being brought in here, I think that, you know, we can find, as we're sort of moving through the book, right, that a lot of these visual signifiers can come to sort of mean other things too, right? That we can see these overlaps and we can see those thematic, that interplay between the chapters as well. So I don't want to overdetermine my reading of this piece just because I made it. Like that's not really right to me. But you know, if anybody has any thoughts on this, I'd really love to hear them. But that was sort of the idea behind, the main idea behind this cover piece. That there's an element from each chapter. There's a visual element from each of the idea behind each chapter within this piece, and they're all sort of, some of them some elements could signify a couple of things at once, right? And I think that it's important to sort of, I guess, to keep that in mind, right? That there's multiple interpretive frameworks that we could use for that, right? And for each of our chapters too. We're seeing the relationships between them and the connections between them. And it's just so important. Maybe it's just because I've been so isolated for so long now that thinking about those connections just becomes crucial to me, right? It really, really is. So, so yeah, thank you for the opportunity to talk about this. And thanks so much, Sarah, for putting this together as well. I really, really appreciate it. Yeah, if anybody has any questions, feel free to ask them, but I will, I'm not sure if I should keep this up if there are any questions, but I'll just kind of, I'll stop myself there in any case. Thank you so
much. Thanks, Jade, for that. And I'm gonna take on from where Jade is here and introduce the first section of the book, Material Culture, Embodiment, and Well-Being. So with this section explores a variety of interactions between body, material culture, and well-being. The authors read physical engagements with cultural items and theorize the places of these items within their local and or personal tribal knowledge systems. The chapters highlight how material culture and embodied practices function to connect participants to the larger relational nexus in which such practices are situated, and invite participants to inhabit and enact Indigenous epistemologies of relationality. And I can kind of see this when we're looking at this, and what I see with the cover of the book. I see this idea of relationality through the roots with the flowers, and the idea of a rhizomatic sort of connection where everything is connected, independent on their own, but connected at the same time and talking through everything. And so that's where I kind of see the idea with the artwork that Jade is bringing forward with this section here. In this section, relationships become the core of health and well-being, and material culture remembers these relationships as acts of decolonization. Embodied practices such as those described in this section contribute to the health and well-being of Indigenous peoples. In this section, there are 3 different chapters. The first chapter is by Gail Mackay, an Anishinaabe Métis professor, who utilizes the pouch and how the pouch can be a framework in order to engage in research. The model that McKay provides is a culturally restorative approach that informs and sustains Indigenous wellness in a number of ways. First, by identifying the existence and coherence of the Anishinaabe philosophy of Pamadswin. And I apologize for my Anishinaabe. It's not the greatest. Neither's my Cree, neither's my Michif, and neither's my English 90% of the time. So we'll go that way with it. Within this, the pouch, and what I like what she talks about the pouch is she talks about the process of it. That when we're engaging within the process of creating the pouch, we're moving through this idea of survival, resistance, and resurgence. So when Visner begins to engage in notions of survivance, she's showing the process of how individuals can begin to move their way through this. In the second article, in Baskets, Birch Bark Scrolls, and Maps of Land, Indigenous Making Practices of Oral Historiography, Anishinaabe scholar Andrea Riley Muscovitz provides a theoretical meditation on the making of Indigenous oral history. Making history, she says, allows the maker to practice relationality and enliven intergenerational knowledge transfer or conversations to go through. And finally, to close this up, and I'm just looking at time, but we have one of the authors, and the third author here who's going to be speaking right after. And I'm not going to do too much, Adesola. I'm going to let you highlight it. I just want to highlight one of the things, though, within your chapter, discusses the idea of the jingle dress and the importance of the jingle dress and movement that's going through there. And so, as Adesola says, the code of material culture is not the making of an object in the conventional sense, but a relational nexus that heals colonial fragmentation and invites an embodied experience of Indigenous ways of being in relationship. And so with all three chapters, what we begin to understand is the importance and connections of relationality and how we are all connected, but how we're connected more than just to ourselves, but to our space and place. And so with that, I'd like to hand it over to Adesola to carry forward with her chapter. Thank you.
Okay, cool, thank you. So for the fun of it, we're trying to have different experiences. So I'm going to be doing a movement experience. So I can't see anybody. So I'm hoping that you'll all kind of go with me on this. And we're going to do some movement as a way of kind of embodying some of the ideas in the chapter. And I'm not going to, because we're doing a kind of embodiment thing, I'm going to get us moving first, and then I'll talk a little bit about maybe how that connects to the chapter. So if you just sort of, if you can stand up, and we're just going to take our left hand and give your arm, the other arm, the right arm, like tapping, as if you're just like you could do the back of it, and then up and underneath, along up to your neck, round, just tapping. You can make the tapping different rhythm. So it's not all this the same, and really into the fingers, the wrist, again underneath. And then that same arm, you could just give it a shake, and then shake it in lots of different directions, round, up and down, behind you. And then just standing still for a minute and letting that both hands hang down, and just noticing if they feel different. Like, what does that arm feel like? Like for me, it's kind of got a bit more of a buzzing. It's got a bit of a buzzing feeling, and it feels a bit more dropped in on my shoulder. Like it feels like it's a little, I'm more in kind of contact with it. It could be, you could say that because we've kind of given it some movement attention, and my brain's kind of more connected with it. It also feels a little bit longer for me. And actually, you might put your fingers together and you might find that it is a little bit longer. It might not be, but it could well be. So let's do that on the other side. So same thing, like just giving the other arm a tap, up the outside, down to the fingers, underneath, round, a little bit onto up to your neck where it's connecting onto your body. And then giving that a shake. Lots of different directions that it can be. in. And this time you could also add maybe a leg on the same side. You can't see it, but my leg's shaking. And then the other one, shaking everything a little bit. And then just standing for a moment. And we're just gonna feel, what does that feel like? Not making a judgment, like not trying to fix anything, but just what am I feeling like going through my body, what my feet are feeling like right now, maybe going up through my body, what my knees are feeling like, how I'm present in my hips. We're just gonna do that for a couple of minutes. I'm not going to speak so that you get a chance to just feel what sensations that are present right now. And then as you're feeling that, you might also notice what temperature there is on your skin, what the light's doing around you, what colors you see, what sounds. And then maybe a sort of awareness of being in this moment, in this place. And then if you want to, you could just to come out of that, like feel what that feels like, sort of stretching out into that color that's around you and the light that's around you and the sound that's around you. And I'm just going to say a tiny bit about the chapter. So I'm my background is in dancing, and I'm very interested in this connection. So part of what we were doing, like this embodiment, is about being present. One of the things that we might find that we articulate being present in pain. Like, what does it feel like? Often the language we have is around pain, and when we don't language any other kind of forms of being present, that can be difficult. So just the practice of being present in your body and in a joyful way through feeling it and articulating the language for that is important. And that the arts stimulate your senses so that you have a sort of a vocabulary or a set of references for being present in many different ways, not just through discomfort or pain. And also the arts kind of allow you to be aware that you're having an experience, like they kind of bring you into the moment. So the idea of being present for that the arts can help you in being present. And then there's this idea of one's own presence of being, that often, in the past or in systems that are abusive, one's presence of being is not articulated. And then from that, there's an affirmation of being. And from that, this idea of, therefore, the importance of contemporary artworks speaking with Indigenous youth, so that there is an affirmation of one's presence of being through the embodied sensation of how art can raise one's awareness of being present. So I know I've said the word present a lot of times, but I just wanted to kind of take you through the kind of the trail of ideas. So the chapter's about a particular piece of movement art that was made for very young children, but in terms of a kind of experience that suggesting that it's really important to have contemporary experiences that speak with Indigenous youth as a way of affirming their presence of being. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you also, Bobby, for introducing that. If anyone has any questions for either Adesola or Bobby, you can put it in the chat and we can have a conversation. I'll also, while people are thinking of maybe questions or comments, I'll go back. There was a question for Jade about the cover art. So maybe we'll just take a minute. Kisa says, for me, our roots make us who we are. Arts equal connection to ancestry, to our roots, and connection to the land. It's all interconnected. Was this some of the thought process with the many roots on the cover art?
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for thanks for making space for that question, Sarah, because I thought it was great. And yeah, I love that interpretation. I love the thoughts that you shared there, Kisa. I thought that was excellent. And yeah, this idea, right, that also like the roots, like they connect, like, you know, water and land and like plant life, and there's just like this there's so much space for that, right? And so I love your interpretation there, so thank you so much for that.
And we've got some comments here just saying that body's feeling joyful and alive, amazing, exciting. So thank you very much for that presentation. And we can go on to Nancy.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, that was really great. It was so nice, especially in a Zoom context, I think, to have that presentation and that embodied experience, because so often when we're on Zoom, or at least my experience is that it's all just up here. So it was really nice to have that reprieve and to remember that we're bodies doing this work, not just heads. So yeah, thank you. My name again is Nancy Van Styvendale. I'm here in Mesquite, also known as Edmonton, Alberta, on Treaty 6 territory and Métis homeland. Very happy to be here and see this book come to fruition. It's been a long journey for all of us. And so yeah, just super grateful to be here. I wanted to talk about the second theme of the collection, which is community health and wellness. And that theme, that section contains 2 chapters. We have the authors for one of the chapters here with us today. And then the other chapter I'll talk about briefly now. But in both chapters in that section, the authors discuss how artistic and cultural practices promote the health and well-being of wider relationship networks, and how artistic products and practices contain Indigenous knowledges and values related to living well, as we've already said. Both chapters in this section take a community-based research approach. And so one of the interesting and distinctive things about this collection, I think, in addition to its interdisciplinarity, which Jade referred to, is the fact that, well, along with that interdisciplinarity, we have very diverse methodological approaches throughout the collection. You can tell that from some of Bobby's summary already for the first section, in terms of, you know, a close reading of a medicine pouch, and then Adesola talking about sort of the jingle dress dance performance. In this section, both chapters are taking a community-based research approach, so engaging with community members themselves in groups to consider the role of artistic practices in Indigenous communities. And so Elena Rosen's chapter, which is called Stories and Staying Power, Art Making as Source and Resource of Cultural Resilience and Well-Being for Paniktumut. That chapter analyzes the importance of the arts to Inuit cultural and economic resilience. And one of the important things about this chapter is that Rosen problematizes the idea of resilience as it's commonly understood in a Western health framework. I mean, that idea is really common, resilience that is. But Rosen draws attention to the fact that in Western definitions of resilience, there tends to be a linear narrative about the individual and their capacity to spring back from adversity. And she sets that in tension with Inuit concepts of resilience, in which the focus is on the collective and the cultural, as well as the individual and the family. And so through qualitative interviews and analysis of those interviews with Inuit artists, Rosen shows how Inuit art provides a visual oral history and encourages knowledge exchange across generations. She also interestingly speaks to the history of Inuit art production, pointing to the role of art in early trade relations and the ongoing commercial success of the Inuit art market. And so in this way, she's tying the significance of art to the economic health of Indigenous communities. The other chapter in this section is Healthy Connections, Facilitators' Perceptions of Programming, Linking Arts and Wellness with Indigenous Youth, which is a collaboratively authored chapter written by a diverse team of community and university researchers, including our presenters today, Mamata Pandy and Warren Linds, and they worked together for over 10 years in arts-based health research in Southern Canada. And so I'll now introduce Mamata and Warren, who will speak to us about their work. Mamata Pandy is a research scientist at the Saskatchewan Health Authority in Regina. She employs innovative research techniques to identify evidence-based strategies that can improve the quality of care for patients in the health region and in rural and remote First Nations communities in Saskatchewan. And Warren Linds, an associate professor in the Department of Applied Human Sciences at Concordia University in Montreal, has worked since 2005 as part of the Indigenous Peoples Health Research Center in partnership with the Fowle Hills Qu'Appelle Tribal Council Health Services Youth Action Program. His research and pedagogical interests are in arts-based research and inquiry, ethical practice, and social justice, and he has had extensive experience in popular theater and community development. And so without further ado, I will turn it over to our two presenters. Thank you.
Good evening or good day. I'm speaking from Jogjague, the land of where the Haudenosaunee are the guardians of this land, in otherwise known as Montreal. I want to acknowledge that this chapter is also co-written with Nuno Ribeiro, who works in Vietnam, and Linda Goulet, Joanna Piscanu, and Karyn Schmidt, and a larger project that involved others with the tribal council we work with. And I also want to remember, who has passed in the spirit world, David Benjo, an artist and arts educator, Indigenous arts educator, who passed away during our project. Didn't contribute, wasn't part of this chapter, but it was very much in our memories and our hearts. I came onto this project, invited on around the arts-based research piece and the theater piece, by Linda Goulet and Joanna Piscanu. And Joanna Piscanu was a mentor. Bobby's spoken movingly about her, a mentor, colleague, and friend. And it lives on through us, through our work and our writing. We worked for 11 years together with the Tribal Council Youth Program and many, many, many projects. And this is just but one description of one project. And then I'll turn it over to Mamata to introduce what the chapter is about, and then I'll talk a little bit more afterwards about a part of the focus of the chapter.
Thank you, Nancy and Warren. Good evening and good day to everybody who's joined us today. My name is Mamada Pandy, and I'm joining from Regina, located on Treaty 4 territory, the original land of the Cree, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, and the homeland of the Métis Nations. I would like to start with expressing my gratitude for the mentorship, support, and knowledge that I received from Dr. Joanne Piscanu during this project, and for all the work that I continue to do in partnership with the Indigenous people and communities. I wouldn't have been working in this area if it wasn't for Dr. Joanne Piscanu. I'm really grateful for this opportunity. I'm just going to quickly summarize the lessons that we have learned while we carried out this project, and then hopefully we'll have a little bit of time to actually act out something, or maybe even express ourselves in some different ways. So in this chapter, our experience was art creates a safe space, allowing us to put our guards down and open up to the possibilities that might be out there. in ways we perceive, think, and act in difficult situations. Sometimes this itself has a healing effect. And art transforms not only perspective, thoughts, or actions, but has a positive impact on our self-esteem, self-identity, and that of the community as a whole. It restores pride and confidence in our competency to give back to the community. However, the finished product is crucial in bringing the entire healing journey to completion, as it gives a tangible memory aid to what was accomplished and who we truly are. And I'll turn over to Warren for a bit.
Yes, and the project worked with several Indigenous artists, working with youth in the communities we were working with. And I want to quote from and it focuses on their perceptions of what happened with the youth. And one of the facilitators, who we'll call Elizabeth, said, "I think things really started to turn around for them when they actually got some hands-on kind of stuff." So we talked a bit of, this is a video project, just footage they could get locally. They were making a documentary, and they had all kinds of ideas of what they might do. And then they got cameras. And we put together a schedule with crews and separate teams. And once they got in their vehicles and took off to actually do some videotaping and came back, then they're really excited about it because they felt now, I guess, a stronger connection to the project. They felt they were making their decisions, but what they wanted to see instead of just being in the classroom, having someone lecture at them. And in the conclusion, we say collaborative creativity was key to the success of these programs, as each program its own way, and one of them was a video documentary, and the other one was making masks, and the third one was doing a graffiti wall at their school. Each program aligned with the values of traditional Indigenous education systems. Through Wisiwetowin, helping and supporting each other, facilitators modeled and taught professional positive responses to conflicts and negative emotions. As youth practice the traditional values of respect, sharing, caring, and working together, the positive relationships led to the creation of a safe space of trust in the facilitators and in themselves, where youth could express both negative and emotions and cultural connections.
Thank you, Warren. So I'm just reaching out to everybody who's on the Zoom call or the webinar. And let's just put our guard down for a bit, be a little playful, be like children who like to pretend and problem solve through pretending. So I want to invite you on this spaceship that's traveling through time and universe, and we're all in this together. And lo and behold, our spaceship land, and we find ourselves in a very strange land called the pandemic. Guess what? The rules are very different to what we're used to. People don't talk to each other. They stay at least 2 meters or 6 feet apart. All we can see is their eyes. Everybody seems to be cautious, really jumping at any attempt to make contact or to reach out. We don't know what to do, how to say, how to conduct ourselves, and we find ourselves caught by a group of people who appears to be guards, probably, or somebody in authority, and we are presented before the king. His name is COVID, and we have to say something or do something, and it could be anything. I guess in a strange land, we could be scared, we could be curious, we could be anxious, we could be adventurous. So I'm going to go first to maybe give an idea what I would do. Presented before the king, I would probably bend my head in respect and say, "Do you want to be friends? Can we play together? Nice." So now I open it up for others to maybe share what they would like to do. Or
Please tell me a joke.
anyone else?
I was going to say, Mamata, I'd probably try to bend my head to bow, but my neck would cramp up from all the Zoom calls. So
And we have to be mindful, we don't know if King COVID even understands our language. So
Good old fist pump. No more handshakes. Do the fist pump or the elbow bump.
absolutely.
You could write it in the chat as well.
Yeah. And I want to encourage you all to think about it, because of course it might be like very abrupt, but whatever comes to mind at the first instance is probably wonderful. Sing a traditional song. Yes, wonderful. Play a fun song for King COVID. Absolutely.
Why have you felt so lonesome? Where you came from, and what do you need from us?
Absolutely.
This is not well thought through, but well, clearly, because we're just asked to think of it now, but it does occur to me that this exercise is interesting because it asks us to think in a way within that relational framework that that the book establishes. And so, you know, to think about how we live with this virus, or what the relationship is with the virus, or with all, you know, aspects of life is an interesting question, I think.
Yes, and our chapter talks a little bit about the relationality between the artist, the youth artists, and the art. The connection, or the relationality between the three of them, and the land that they're on and that they're working in, and their life histories. A very complex system of relationality.
Well, thank you everyone for responding to that question. I'm going to be thinking about that. I have a feeling something, I don't know, I might cry. That might be my response. But these are wonderful responses. I would now invite Rob to introduce the next chapter.
Okay, hello everyone. I am going to be talking about the next section of the book, which is resistance, resurgence, and imagining otherwise. The three chapters in this section of the book, the last section of the book, all encompass these three themes throughout their chapters. In the first chapter, body counts, war, pesticides, and queer spirituality, and Sherry Moraga's Heroes and Saints. Desiree Helligers provides analysis of Moraga's play, which is Heroes and Saints. Helligers argues that Moraga's queer feminism links the deaths of farm workers in the US and Latin America with homophobia, the AIDS crisis, queering, feminizing, and Indigenous Latin American liberation theology. Helligers critiques the ideological barriers to coalition building, and highlights the questions Moraga's play raises about the between dioxin contamination and U.S. sponsored neocolonial violence that were present in the Vietnam War and the war on drugs. The next one, Language of Soul and Ceremony, by Elder Louise Haff, guides us through a quote, healthy discussion about ceremony and protocol. Elder Louise Haff is a fluent Cree speaker, but nonetheless, she consulted 6 elders in an exploration of the Plains Cree language to highlight the teachings within it. She outlines how her understandings of the various cultural practices and quote hopes that in releasing this information, it will open the door to further discussion and help those in need. The final chapter by Dr. Karyn Recollet, Sagawi Waywin, Lands Overflow into Spatial Otherwise, ends the book looking at Indigenous art through Indigenous dance, hip hop, and through what Karyn calls, okay, I'm going to get this word wrong. I've been practicing it. Sonic digital aqueous work that is centered around hope and love. Now we have Dr. Karyn Recollet here, so I will introduce her. I have known Dr. Recollet for many years. She was my first year prof when I first went to university. Just kidding. We were both in the MA cohort together at the U of S in Native Studies. Right now, Dr. Recollet is an assistant professor in the Women and Gender Studies Institute at the University of Toronto. She's an urban Cree who research explores the multiple layered relationships that urban Indigenous folks have with lands overflow. Karyn's focal points are choreographic fugitivity and Indigenous futurities and decolonial love processes of creating radical relationalities with kin. Dr. Recollet.
Hi, thank you. Wow, what an honor to be amongst these fine folks tonight. I feel a lot of gratitude. I also feel in relation. In a very short period of time, these people have inspired me and made me feel quite happy tonight, actually. So let's see. I can start talking a little bit about the chapter in the book and sort of where I was thinking at that moment in time and how since my thoughts have perhaps changed a little bit or transformed. But I've always been interested in thinking alongside more or other than human kinships. And I think that came natural to me as an Indigenous person who was born in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, actually, 47 years ago. And being a diasporic Indigenous person that has fallen into place as a result of adoption. For me, it was the 70s scoop. So that's how I came into relation with the ways that I myself and others that I know think about ourselves as Indigenous adoptees. To think of ourselves less than, as not less than or lacking, but as perhaps spaced differently or placed differently. Those of us who have landed differently into place, into relation, and oftentimes into cities and into diasporic atmospherics that we then are tasked with learning how to land well and how to land in relationships. So what I've written is, it's kind of like a love letter to all of the people that have inspired me up until, well, not all of them, obviously there's more, but some folks that have been brilliant activators in the world, such as Equal or Lindsay Knight, and some other very thoughtful, creative human beings that I have had the honor to share space with. So in the article, I talk about kinstillatory, which is a concept that came to me quite slowly, but eventually landed. When I'm going to be quite real, so I hope that's okay. When I was a single mother in downtown Toronto, I found myself wanting kin as support. And I found myself wondering, where's all the fire keepers? Where are they? Because they certainly aren't here. And so I realized that I had to embody fire and water at the same time. So it was a moment of reckoning, I think, with how I needed to reach out to celestial, to the stars, for support and for fire and for grounding, which was really weird at the time. But it was a way of like thinking through, I get grounded by the stars because of the diasporic movement and dislocation from my home community, which was Sturgeon Lake First Nation, into Southern Ontario. So that started my love for more than human kinships with rock, meteorite, and forces of flight and landing. And then I was encouraged to read this book, part of the Broken Earth trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. And it's called The Fifth Season. And I fell into relationship with Black speculative fiction, actually, and started realizing that a lot of the kinships that I was looking for, that I was desiring, were actually framed within speculative thought. And then I thought, well, I think that we were always speculative in our thinking. We always thought about future ancestors, and we always oriented ourselves to that kind of vibration of the future, whether it be treaty making or other kinds of negotiations and conversations that we were having. We're always gesturing towards the future. So then I was really attracted to hip hop as a form of expression. And I found that hip hop sonics were actually the vibration and the force that would gather folks together. So it echoed in a way some of the same kinds of shapes or forms that mimicked how I conceived of myself falling into place as an Indigenous adoptee. So my own flight into place was perhaps rupturous, a kind of falling into an unknown as a detourist pattern of flight, with forces of pressure, heat, breath, and a landing of sorts. So I found that the cadence and the tonality and the rhythm of hip hop actually articulated a lot of those very fine articulations of movement, but rupture, holding tension and releasing tension, breath, all of those atmospherics that I imagined myself going through when I was adopted into Southeastern Ontario. So that's kind of got me thinking about the praxis and the kind of thinking that was going to go into this article. And, Round Dance Revolution with I Don't Know More became a moment for me because my mother had been taking me to round dances around Sturgeon Lake. And this was a moment because here's this place where I was raised, and now we have these round dances happening at Yonge and Dundas. And I started really looking at the forms of round dances, the circuitous motions of the form of a round dance, and the sonics of a round dance, and the singing of love songs in downtown Toronto as really having an affect on the place and of making place and producing sort of like space making practices of joy, of belonging, of love, because these were all love songs that were being sung. And so that did something, that created something. And I started asking the questions about Indigenous sonics and what kinds of space-making possibilities can flow through Indigenous sonics. And I guess I'll just kind of like end there. I have some more things, but I also wanted to like pause. And that's something that articles, when you're writing them, it's very hard to produce a pause and a stillness in the work. And that's where I think the work of dance, the work of movement practices, the work of breath, like I think all of that helps to sustain that sort of space of possibility, that pause, that quiet, the stillness. because you know within that stillness there is also something happening, something manifesting. And so I think the time that since I wrote the article and now I've been moving with those thoughts, it's been really lovely to kind of, I guess, witness everybody else's thoughts, and that all builds it up. It all does something in our worlds and our atmospheric. So thank you for your generosity with that. I would like to share one more thing if possible. So this is something that I'm writing in relationship with my colleague and co-thinker, Emily Johnson. And this is a work around what does fire make possible as co-thinker collaborator. So I'm just going to share this one piece. And the following is an abbreviated excerpt from a land prophecy as told by my cousin, Sylvia McAdam. In the future, the earth is going to burn. When the earth is going through that time, the northern animals will die out. And when they do, people will panic. And the southern animals will begin to move to the north, devour the northern animals and disappear. Even when you go to take water from the lakes and rivers, even the water will burn. If you don't have your prayers, your songs, your connection to Creator, you will be very challenged on how to call the animals through our songs. The only thing left to eat will be deep in the ground, the frogs, the snakes, the creatures. You will need to have the songs to call them forth. And this is Sylvia McAdam, and it's from YouTube, The Land Prophecy, that they shared on March 31st, 2020. And this is my response to that work. And I think I'd just like us to have some moment with the work. And whatever that feels like or looks like for you, if you want to put a couple of words down, maybe in the chat, if it's inspiring you in some way, that would be lovely. But if not, that's okay. So these are my words. It's kind of a little poem I wrote. Okay, here we go. They listened to Sylvia McAdam's video from the archive, the one where her elders, our elders, shared this moment of time when the songs of the worms, the knowledge of the worms, and how to live in darkness emerged. We have to observe the worms for the way they organize, how they gather and share bioluminescence through bone, mercury, to illuminate our fears, so that we can break open to that space where we are finally in communion with each other. It's okay to be afraid, as Sean says, in this moment of time when we open ourselves to heartbreak, to dealing, to feeling, and a feelingness of letting go. Sometimes to breathe through the burn means that we have to become subterrestrial. We have deep-rooted relationships with underground practices. Let's hope that this relational kin genealogical strategy works for us. We tried our schedules to maintain a sense of self within that moment of social distancing, but we soon realized that these schedules were born not of bone, but of a skeleton of production that only maximized our guilt, our shared shame, and our inabilities to maintain an unrealistic, inhuman form of being. We instead laid down, we rested, we played with our podlings, we learned how to use our gills, to begin to breathe underwater, to become riparian as we were meant to. Instead, we established our connections with water beings, asked for consent in ways that we had never imagined but were necessary. We learned to seep ourselves into spaces, not impose ourselves, but rather a more gradual, gentler kind of visiting that acknowledged our ways of being gentle and tender with one another. Taking our time to be in spaces that acknowledged our own body autonomy and others. Visiting, entering became a process, a trail, a slow gesture into spaces. We gently asked the old ones while we prepared tea for them to help us to learn the worm songs. Like gentle rain, these songs became a part of us so that we realized that these songs were for everyone to keep us safe. We began teaching the young ones to enter those spaces between sister atmospheres and to breathe with gills underwater and to teach them how to use their eyelids in creative ways, to perceive bioluminescence that lived inside them, to seek out future kin underwater, under earth, to play with the sinuous rhizomes, respectively follow their paths to seek water. We learned through our sings that Earth's core was beautiful, welcoming, and emergent. We learned how to breathe in rock, through sand, through soil. We learned how to love ourselves again, how to love others, and that we can rise and fall in darkness.
Wow, thank you so much, Karyn. What a beautiful incantation or invocation. I'll open the floor. It is after 8 p.m., but I'll open the floor just to any responses that people might have, any quick questions for our speakers before we close out the night. Carrie says, I hope I can be blessed to learn worm songs one day. Powerful. Space of possibility, quiet and wonderful. Yes. Well, thank you everyone for coming. Thank you to all of our amazing speakers. This was a very inspiring evening. Yeah, thank you for coming. You can purchase the print and ebook versions of The Arts of Indigenous Health and Wellbeing. I'll hold up the book again. The link is in the chat. I'll post it so you don't have to scroll through, so you can find it easily, as well as the promo code. And thank you again to Bobby, Nancy, Rob, Jade, as well as Adesola, Mamata, Warren, and Karyn for your offerings tonight and for sharing your work and your gifts. Thank you so much, everyone.